I think there's so many fucking powerful people that are on those lists. There's so many powerful people that went and partied. Air quotes, partied. And how many of them went to the Diddy parties? Have you been paying attention to the trial?
Oh, yeah.
Trials.
To ask questions like, were their decisions colored by certain things, and who got the benefit of the doubt, in that courtroom?
Do you think that hip-hop culture was on trial as much as Sean Combs was?
Look, if I didn't say anything, you would interpret it as the hip-hop is fine with his behaviors. There's no one else being vocal. So you would look at it and just say, because that mind your business, or let me not say nothing about nothing.
What if the biggest names in entertainment weren't caught by accident, but exposed by silence? For weeks now, one question keeps circling the internet like smoke that won't clear. Not just about one powerful figure, but about everyone who stood nearby while doors were closed and cameras were off. Because when certain people finally speak, they don't whisper. Joe Rogan and 50 Cent aren't presenting court documents. They're doing something far more dangerous. They're asking why so many influential faces keep showing up in the same rooms, and why nobody wants to talk about what happened inside them. This isn't about rumors floating on blogs. It's about patterns, invitations, and selective silence. Rogan framed it simply. When powerful people gather under the banner of just partying, what does that really mean? Who was there? Who benefited? And more importantly, who was protected when questions started getting uncomfortable? Silence doesn't mean innocence. It means leverage. 50 Cent pushed the idea further. He suggested that when no one challenges bad behavior publicly, the entire culture absorbs the blame, not because everyone participated, but because nobody objected. And that's where this stops being entertainment gossip. If nobody says anything, the message becomes clear. This is acceptable. And once that message settles in, the line between ignorance and complicity starts to blur. Rogan raised another uncomfortable angle. When high-profile trials happen, are decisions influenced only by evidence or by relationships built long before anyone entered a courtroom? Who gets grace? Who gets buried? And who never even gets questioned? That's the tension sitting underneath all of this, because the fallout around Diddy didn't appear overnight. It arrived after years of access, loyalty, and closed-door credibility. And now that consequences are real, people are suddenly rewriting their proximity. But proximity leaves footprints. As legal outcomes landed and sentences were handed down, attention shifted fast, not just toward the charges, but toward the circle. The artists, the executives, the celebrities who once stood proudly close and now claimed distance. And that's when names started surfacing, not accusations, associations. One name in particular kept triggering reactions online, a familiar face who had been present during the rise, the parties, the visibility, then vanished from the narrative the moment things turned ugly. Rogan didn't have to spell it out. Listeners connected the dots themselves. Why does distancing always happen after the damage is done? That question hit harder than any allegation, because when someone rushes to declare innocence before being accused, people notice. When statements sound defensive instead of calm, audiences start listening differently. Public declarations followed, strong language, claims of independence, assertions of power. On the surface, it looked confident, but to many watching, it felt like preemptive damage control. And the internet has a long memory. Old footage, old photos, old celebrations resurfaced. Moments that once looked harmless now carried weight. Coordinated appearances, lavish events, carefully curated loyalty. History doesn't disappear just because the narrative changes. The louder the denials became, the more attention returned to the past, not because proof suddenly appeared, but because context did. And context has a way of rearranging meaning. Then came the audio chatter. Was it real? Was it manipulated? Was it planted by someone who waited years for the right moment? Different voices said different things, but one detail stood out. Who would benefit from its release? Some called it technology, others called it betrayal. A few suggested it could only come from someone who was actually there. That uncertainty kept the conversation alive. As pressure increased, statements shifted. First, complete separation, then partial acknowledgement. Finally, a new version, present but uninvolved. 3 stories, 1 timeline. And when stories keep changing, people stop asking what happened and start asking why the truth needs so many revisions. Because just as attention locked onto this first circle, whispers began pointing higher, toward figures whose influence doesn't rely on music, fame, or headlines, but on power itself. And that's where this gets much bigger. When people online started revisiting the past, it wasn't because new evidence appeared. It was because old moments suddenly sounded different. Memory doesn't fade, it waits. The first defense was simple, total separation, claims that the rumors were exaggerated, manufactured, or pushed by faceless accounts chasing clicks. According to that version, the stories were fiction, and proximity never existed. But then, clips resurfaced. Not shaky footage or anonymous screenshots, clear moments, celebrations, lavish events designed to be seen. Nights where loyalty wasn't whispered, it was displayed. And that's where the disconnect began. Because people remembered the birthday in Vegas, the private mansion, the coordinated presence, the atmosphere that felt less like a casual gathering and more like a carefully staged declaration of closeness. And closeness leaves witnesses. Matching outfits, repeated appearances, public praise that sounded personal, not professional. At the time, nobody questioned it. Power was intact. The spotlight felt safe. But once the legal storm arrived, the tone changed fast. Statements grew louder. Language grew grander. Emphasis shifted to independence, strength, and control. The message was clear. I was never part of that. When confidence arrives late, people hear fear instead. What unsettled viewers wasn't just denial, it was urgency, the speed at which distance was created, the way explanations came before accusations. Then came the second version. Not absence, but presence without participation. Yes, there were parties. Yes, there was access, but nothing inappropriate. Just music, conversation, and vibes. According to this telling, nothing crossed a line. But here's the problem. Those stories don't cancel each other out. You can't be nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The internet noticed. Side-by-side timelines appeared, screenshots paired with quotes. Fans didn't argue morality, they questioned logic. And logic was struggling. Old audio rumors added gasoline to the fire. Some dismissed them as artificial, others believed they were leaked intentionally, held back until consequences became unavoidable. The question wasn't whether the audio was real, it was who waited long enough to feel safe releasing it, because timing tells its own story. When challenges were issued, money offered to investigate, promises to expose the source, people expected follow-through, updates, proof. Closure. None came. Instead, the noise faded, replaced by silence, and silence, once again, became the loudest element in the room. Fans began reinterpreting moments that once felt harmless. Jokes sounded different, compliments felt uncomfortable, familiar language took on new meaning. One resurfaced clip alone dominated timelines for days, not because it proved anything, but because it couldn't be explained away cleanly. Context doesn't accuse, it reveals. Public opinion fractured. Some defended loyalty, others saw red flags they could no longer ignore. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: the story kept shifting. And when stories keep shifting, credibility weakens. That's when the conversation expanded beyond entertainment. Because as people dug deeper, they realized this wasn't just about artists, it was about access, protection, and who decides which stories never reach daylight. Behind the scenes, insiders hinted that certain names were untouchable, that interviews vanished, that doors quietly closed for anyone who asked the wrong questions. And that's when another kind of power entered the discussion. Not loud power, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. And once that idea surfaced, attention shifted toward a figure whose influence stretches far beyond entertainment, someone whose silence has always carried weight. That's where this story turns. When the conversation shifted, it didn't move toward louder voices, it moved toward quieter ones, because silence can be strategic. As speculation grew, one name began surfacing again and again, not through accusations, but through unanswered questions, a figure whose presence in Hollywood has always been framed as guidance, wisdom, and protection. But critics weren't asking what she did, they were asking why she never spoke. Because when influence is that large, neutrality stops looking neutral. People remembered the photos, the appearances, the public alignment with figures who were later exposed. At the time, those connections were dismissed as professional or charitable. In hindsight, they felt closer than advertised. Power isn't loud, it's selective. Support was visible when projects needed credibility. Silence followed when accountability appeared. That contrast stood out. Survivors, advocates, and insiders all echoed the same frustration. When voices with the loudest microphones say nothing, the system stays intact. And that's where trust starts cracking. The discussion widened beyond entertainment. It moved into institutions, media,